Welcome to Tips for Preparing for Your First Law School Exam, brought to you by the Law Student Division, the Young Lawyers Division, the Section of Litigation, and the Career Center. ABA membership is free for law students. The Law Student Division offers premium benefits, which include access and savings for Quimby.com, discounts on bar review programs, up to $50 off West Academic casebooks, and a legal ethics bundle that includes a free model rules of professional conduct ebook. Upgrade to premium for only $25. The Young Lawyers Division is the ABA's home for the new attorney, giving members tools to navigate the early years of career, opportunities to network, and resources to grow skill sets. ABA lawyer members under the age of 36 or in practice 5 years or less, and law student members are automatically enrolled in the Young Lawyers Division for free. The Section of Litigation provides student opportunities to network with experienced litigators and resources like quick sound advice podcasts and telephone roundtable discussions, perfect for busy law students. Section membership is free for law students. The ABA Career Center offers both career development resources and a job board for law students, lawyers, and other legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. Today we're excited and grateful to have Professor Nina Hayden with us. Professor Hayden is a professor of practice and Director of Academic Success and Bar Preparation Services at Stetson University College of Law. She teaches multi-state strategies and directs the Academic Success and Bar Preparation Services Department, which assists students in their academic achievement and supports alumni during their bar preparation period. Professor Hayden, we'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you. So it's a pleasure being virtual here so that we can connect and talk about preparing for your first law school exam. I know for many of you, it may be a pretty anxious and nervous situation in that it's something that you don't really know of, you haven't experienced it yet, but you're about to. So it's my pleasure to walk you through some steps that will really help you. It will help you, release some of that anxiety and that nervousness, and will help you keep focused on what you need to do, which is to do well on your first law school exams. So what do you first need to do to prepare? What's really important is that you have a calendar, a planner, something that will specifically state what exams you have, when they are to be, the timing of your exams, and where they are to be. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because it can be a very anxious and very unnerving time. And when you have everything that's planned out ahead of time, it's not something you have to remember. You know it's there because it's written in front of you and you can follow it. But it's also important to know how much study time you have between your exams. You want to make sure that you are spacing your study time appropriately so that if an exam may be potentially scheduled back to back, you have allotted the appropriate time to study beforehand so that you can study for 2 exams if you need to that are back to back. You don't want to, for example, have one exam on Monday and another on Tuesday, and you've only studied for the exam on Monday, not really realizing that after the Monday exam, you're exhausted and you have another exam the following day where you have to perform and be ready. So we want you to make sure that you are preparing your study time in the appropriate time. So let's say, for example, you do have exams that are very close in order. One exam is on a Monday and the next exam is on a Wednesday. My suggestion is that you look ahead to the prior week and you make sure that you're allotting at least a couple days of study time for each exam, maybe two days or so. And so if you don't have the appropriate 2 to 3 days prior to an exam, you'll have to do some pre-study work the days prior to that exam, which may be before that exam that was on Monday, but you're keeping note in your mind that, okay, this is pre-study work that I need to do to study for the exam that's coming up next after my Monday's exam. I hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to ask about that. So you want to make sure, like I said, you have equal study time for each class, and you are making sure that you are studying, doing some pre-studying beforehand. What I also want to suggest is that you're reviewing your professor's past exams. It's super important that you know how your professor is going to test on your professor's exam. It's a lot like practicing, where you're walking into a courtroom and you have a judge, and a certain judge wants a certain thing done that way, whereas another judge may want another thing done that way, whether it's something that you're writing or whether it's something that you're orally presenting. You want to know who your audience is and then craft your exam in a way that satisfies your professor's needs, whether that means your professor is looking for a certain way that you need to respond or answer in an exam, whether your professor is going to have multiple choice questions or essays or true and false. Those types of things you can learn prior to the exam. I want to encourage you to reach out to your professor and ask those specific questions so that you have an idea of how the exam is going to be tested and what the exam is going to be about. Many professors have past exams that they will give you access to, where you can review those exams. And then what you want to make sure you're doing to prepare for the exam is that you're synthesizing your outlines. In other words, the outlines that you've been working on all throughout the semester, you're now condensing those outlines. You're synthesizing, meaning you are making sure that you're taking the notes that you acquired during class, and you're combining those notes with the notes that you've already done for your pre-preparation for class, and then you're condensing it down to a very small outline, and you will use that outline to study from as a study tool for your final exam. You want to make sure, though, that whatever you're creating, whatever learning tool you are creating, that you are creating something that works well for you. You want to make sure that you are absorbing the material and that you're able to put that material back down on a piece of paper as you are responding to an essay prompt or as you're analyzing a multiple choice question, that you have developed your study tool in a way that it works for you in terms of what you need to do. And then what I want to make sure that you folks are doing is that you are practicing. Please do not go to a final exam without having practiced, either if your professor is going to be having an essay prompt, a couple essays, that you have not practiced a couple essays prior to sitting down and preparing to test for that particular subject area. Or if it's multiple choice, you need to make sure that you're doing practice questions. I want to encourage you to do that so that you know how the test, you're simulating a test environment, and that also helps with anxiety too. I found that students that score higher on their first semester law school exams are students that have practiced, have taken note of what we suggest that they do, and they have practiced a couple times, practice writing a couple essays, practice several multiple choice questions, or however the professor is going to test. Look at past exams and go through those exams, whatever it is you think you need to do to be prepared, but practice, practice, practice. You also need to make sure that you're practicing in a timed environment. You need to know how long the exam's going to be so that you can at least practice. Let's say you have an exam that's a 4-hour exam. You're going to have 3 essay prompts and then 25 multiple choice questions. You want to make sure that you're practicing the essay prompts within a timely manner, let's say an hour or so for each essay. You want to make sure that you're doing that and preparing for it in the way that's timed so that you are practicing a simulated environment. And we want to make sure as you're heading into your final exams that you're also maintaining your school and your life balance. That, remember I told you about that calendar, that you're looking at that calendar and make sure that you are allotting the time that's needed to prepare for your final exams, but also get a good night's rest during your study period. You want to make sure that you are studying in a way that is productive, but also that is balanced, and that you're having time to rest and that type of thing. So You want to be cognizant of that as well. So, what about exam skills on the test day? You want to know what's allowed in the class. Is the class allowing class materials? In other words, is there a reading period in the class where you have 30 minutes to review your materials, then you have to put your materials away, and then you have to dig into the exam? You want to know whether or not earplugs are allowed or not allowed, whether or not a laptop is allowed, or you're going to be handwriting. Make sure that you have your power cord and you are sufficiently downloaded for ExamSoft. Make sure you know how to use ExamSoft so that that is ready and at your disposal, and that you're not trying to work through the process on the day of exam. Be connected to your IT department so that if anything happens in terms of your ExamSoft, that you know how to reach out to them. And many a times the registrar's office will have proctoring notes that will tell you for exams who to reach out to if you need to. And you also want to make sure what types of writing tools are allowed. Is it pen, paper, highlighters? Is that something that's also allowed in your classroom on that day? Make sure that you know this information beforehand. So on the day of the exam, you're not scrambling and you're not sure what you need to bring, or for that matter, what you need to wear. Make sure that it's a comfortable environment. More than likely, it's in the classes that you're already in. And so you want to make sure that you're dressing in layers if it's really cold. I know down here it's cold. It can be really cold in the classroom because I'm in Florida and it's hot outside, so the air conditioning is on, but maybe in your area it's actually very cold and it could be hot in your classroom and a little warm. So make sure you're dressing in layers that you can either take off or put on if you need to. If there's mints or candy or water bottles or anything like that is allowed in your classroom, you want to ask beforehand and make sure all that you're knowledgeable about that. And then you want to make sure that you arrive early. Don't be distracted by your cell phones. Turn your cell phones off. Usually what we do here at the College of Law, Stetson, is that we make sure everybody puts their backpacks in the front of the room or the back of the room, whichever is decided that where it needs to go. So make sure you're aware of that. Don't bring anything that is distracted, and make sure that you follow all the rules that are stated to you by your proctor, especially time. You want to make sure as you're going through the exam process that you are looking at the clock, that you're timing yourself, that your timing is well spaced out throughout that exam. What better way to do that than practice? So you practice beforehand. When you're practicing beforehand, remember I said prior to getting to the exam, you need to look at your clock, watch, whatever it is, and make sure that your timing is the timing that is appropriate for that exam. Practice, practice, practice. If you don't get anything else from this webinar, I want to tell you practicing is key. So what are you going to do before you begin? So you're in class, let's say your laptop is allowed and you are about to begin. You want to make sure that it's booted up, your laptop is booted up and ready to go. You want to make sure that you have any blue books that are allowed. In other words, you're allowed these blue books that you can write on for scratch pieces of paper. You want to make sure that you can write it, whether or not you can write on one side or one line. And this is if, let's say, laptops aren't allowed and you're only allowed to use blue books. You want to make sure that you're listening to the instructions and you are following the instructions how they should be followed. I can tell you back in the day when I went to law school, there really weren't laptops. There was more writing more than anything, and so the instructions about writing on the blue book were very important, and we had to make sure we follow them. More than likely, you'll be using a laptop, and with that in mind, your blue books will just be used for scrap paper, and you can write on them. I do want to caution you, though, if you are writing on a blue book, and let's say you're thinking through a fact pattern, an essay prompt, or even a multiple choice question, more so for an essay prompt, and that thinking through process, that analytical process is on the blue book but not in your laptop. You want to be cognizant of that fact that you are transferring the information that's on the blue book onto the laptop so you can get credit for it, unless there are professors that are willing to allow credit. Sometimes they may take those blue books and just throw them away, which means any brain power, any analytical process that you placed on that blue book that did not get into that laptop, Word doc or exam soft or whatever the issue may be, whatever the writing instrument may be, that you will not get credit for that. So you want to be cognizant that you are moving that analytical process, that thought process, onto your laptop. So when you have the exam, what I suggest is that before you begin to write, before you begin to attack the first exam prompt, the exam question, that you look over the entire exam first. You kind of survey the entire exam. And remember I told you about timing? You're going to look at that entire exam, and then you're going to look at timing, and then think in your mind, or even write down, okay, I'm going to allot, an hour and 10 minutes for this essay prompt. I'm going to allot 45 minutes for that one. I'm going to allow more, like an hour and 30 minutes for this essay prompt, because I think it's going to be more challenging. Be cognizant of the time, skim the entire exam, and then do your time allocations. And then you want to make sure that you are staying on track as you're allocating that time. Your professor may tell you, even before, when your professor's doing exam reviews, how many percentage points are allocated to whatever part of the exam. So you want to be cognizant of that. And then you want to stay on track as you're moving through the final exam process. So what to do when we are talking about essays and finally it's time to write? When you're specifically looking at, let's say, essays, so there's an essay prompt, you want to make sure that you're using at least about 1/3 of your time for issue spotting and organization. Professors are looking for exams that don't look like the student doesn't know what they're talking about. The more you know you look like you know what you're talking about, because they're reading it. Remember, you want to write to the individual who is grading. You want to be cognizant. That's why I say practice is so important. You want to be cognizant that you're writing in a way that the grader can understand, your professor can understand what you're saying. It's just that simple. Now, it may be simple the way I'm stating it to you, but you need to recognize whether or not you're writing in a way that is simple enough for the grader to understand. In other words, your writing is not convoluted, but it's very clear in an IRAC format, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, and you're making it in a way, you're not being conclusory too much, your analysis is fleshed out, your analysis is applying the facts to the law. What you want to make sure that you're writing in a clear and concise manner. So what will help you do that is to use about 1/3 of your time to issue spot and organize your writing before you write. Then you want to use the remaining 2/3 time for writing. You want to dive straight into what the first issue is, making sure that you're thoroughly discussing the issue before moving on to the next issue. Many essays, many exams have multiple issues in one essay prompt. So many essays. So in other words, if you have an exam that has 3 or 4 essays, each essay will have multiple issues, and you have to approach every single issue in each essay the same way, in a systematic way that helps your grader, your professor, easily be able to identify and spot the issues that you're trying to relay, and also your answer explanation and your conclusion. If you need to, that's one of the advantages of having a computer. If you need to go back and insert something, let's say a fact or something that you suddenly remember that's significant, you can do that. And make sure that if you're going to use shorthand for case names or anything like that, remember you've already identified that with the professor as to if you can do that. Maybe the professor wants you to write out the complete name of a case. Maybe short names are okay. Maybe one name is okay to identify a specific case. So you want to make sure that you are doing exactly what your professor wants. When you're organizing your writing, you want to make sure you're using headings, clear and concise language, and that you also clearly are stating both sides of the argument. However, I want to say that with a caveat, because you want to make sure that you're writing for the professor the way that they want. If the professor wants both sides of the argument, that's what you're writing. If the professor does not want both sides of the argument, that's what you're writing. So you need to tailor your writing towards what your professor is required. So those are the do's in writing for essay exams that will more than likely be one of your final exams, if not more, coming up very soon. Here's some of the don'ts when you're dealing with essays. Don't write an introduction. In other words, don't write verbiage that is already delineated or written out in the exam prompt itself. And what I see is that many times students will, that's just kind of a nervous thing, well, let me just write, because if I write, then something will be down on the page, and then it'll help me to write more. What you're doing, though, is that you're taking away precious time that could be used by just going right into the issue. So don't do an introduction of the facts. Don't regurgitate the facts. It's not a brief. It's an exam. You're writing for an essay exam, okay? So you don't need to regurgitate the facts. Just go straight into the issue. Make sure also you don't assume or make up any facts that are not in the fact scenario in the essay prompt. Do not make up facts. And most importantly, don't panic when you go in. Just take a deep breath and say, I can do this. I know I can. Many students before me have done it. They've moved on. They're now practicing. And so I know that I can do that too. So let me also talk to you about open book exams versus closed book exams. Are they the same? How should you study for them? In my experience, you should treat an open book exam the same as a closed book exam. Professors will tend to want to lure you into a sense of, oh, well, I can just rely on my outline or whatever I bring in. More likely than not, the exam itself is so challenging that you won't even have a chance to even refer to the notes and materials that you bring in. So I highly suggest that you study for an open book exam the same way you would for a closed book exam. However, for an open book exam, you can bring in resources that, should you need to fall upon those resources, you can do so. Maybe 2 or 3 times you'll have the opportunity to look, but that will only be to verify something that you already know. This is very important. So I want you to be aware of what I'm telling you in terms of open book versus closed. And then you want to make sure that you're utilizing any other study support that you need or help in terms of if you're studying for an open book versus closed book. It's really no difference. It's all the same. You're really focusing on just going back to those condensed, synthesized outlines that I talked about earlier and relying on that to refresh your recollection of what you studied in the beginning of the course till now. Until you are ready to take the exam. When you're dealing with true and false questions, you want to make sure that you're reading carefully the fact pattern. And you're going to watch for those questions that put must, may, or will not. All right? Or will not. Those are very important. And more than likely, your first impulse is probably the best answer. Now, that's if you have studied for the exam and you have that knowledge base that you need to pull upon. If you're guessing, then your first impulse is probably not the best answer. But we are assuming that you're going to be well studied for these exams, and so you're going to read carefully true and false questions. You're going to read carefully essay prompts. You're going to read carefully multiple choice questions, fact scenario prompts as well, so that you're not going to be duped by any of these must, may, or will, or not, but you're going to apply it in the analytical way that you should to come out with the best answer. Now, I also have to tell you that depending on your professor, many professors may not even necessarily be looking for the right answer, but what they're looking for is your analytical process on how you got to an answer, I should say, and that analytical process led to a really good conclusion that could be persuasive one way or not. Many times professors will use prompts, whether it be mostly essay prompts, that can be argued either one way or the next. And they're just looking to see whether or not, first of all, you're applying the correct law, you know the elements of the rules, and then you are analyzing the facts with the rules and coming out with a good conclusion. With short answers, make sure you're not turning a short answer into a long brief. So, for example, there's a difference between an essay prompt that has multiple issues rather than a short answer. If it's a short answer, be narrow in your response. In other words, get right to the response and make sure that your response clearly responds to what the call to question is. That's what you got to make sure. So make sure for short answers, you're not too short. Use the time that's allotted, but you want to make sure that you're using enough time to make sure that your answer is organized, well thought out, concise, and precise. Now, what about when it comes to policy questions? Well, you need to make sure there are questions that turn on policy instead of the law. In other words, there may not be rules that have been promulgated by a specific court where you can clearly say, aha, I know that rule applies to this particular essay prompt or this particular fact scenario, so I'm going to apply it. Instead, you say, well, I remember my professor talking about this policy that is an underlining policy that can be applied in this fact scenario because this fact scenario really brings forth the issues that are addressed by this particular policy, and I can write about it. You want to make sure that when you're using an analysis for your policy that's just as complete as if you were relying on an analysis that were used by the legal rules that you are to apply for that particular essay. Last but not least, I want to turn to grammar and vocabulary. We are obviously writing English exams, and I want you all to be cognizant of the fact that you might need to brush up on grammar rules to make sure your grammar is adequate. Also, your academic vocabulary, making sure that you're using the correct vocabulary. So as you can see upon the slides, you can see there are links that could potentially help you in that if you need to. And preparing outlines for exams, there's also legal dictionaries or defining unknown words. You just need to make sure that you're brushing up on your grammar and vocabulary as you are preparing for your final exams. And as I said, practice writing out full exam responses before the exam day. Not just issue spotting essay prompts, but writing out a full exam before the exam day, you will find will be extremely helpful for you. So, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I've been teaching in around the academic environment for a few years now, so I know that there are potentially things that could happen wrong. Like, for example, you get really sick or someone gets into, a car accident. A car accident happens in front of you and delays you. Or there's just severe distress on the day of the exam. You want to make sure that even beforehand you know exactly who you need to contact. More than likely, it's your registrar's office, and that you know who you need to contact and what remedies you have available to you. So, for example, let's talk about some of the other things that could potentially happen. What if you don't know the answer to the first essay? Well, remember we talked about it earlier. You're going to look at the whole exam. Hopefully, there'll be something on the exam you will know how to address. And we're believing there's going to be something more than one thing on the exam. But what I've found has been very helpful is that you attack that thing first. So, oh wow, I understand this essay prompt. I'm going to attack that. And what usually happens is that triggers your mind. You get into that mode, and you're usually able to remember or to think of something to put down on, let's say, for another area, another essay prompt that will at least help you to successfully finish your exam. Make sure that you're going over your time allocations. And if your laptop freezes or fails, make sure you have your IT information. I'm pretty sure the proctor is going to give you that information. And so we want to make sure that that is something that you know how to reach out to those folks and can help you. And just don't have anxiety and don't stress. I know you're saying that's easy for you to say. How many exams have you done, Professor Hayden? Well, I've done a lot. Because not only did I get my JD, I also received my LLM in international law as well, which is more exams that I had to take. But what I can tell you is that you can do this. You can push through it. Even if you're a little bit of stress and anxiety is very natural, so don't think it's unnatural if you're really anxious. You just don't want to be anxious to the point where you're frozen and you can't perform an exam. So what's going to help you with that? To lessen that stress or anxiety is to do what we've talked about earlier, which is to practice. Practice a full exam. And when you're in the exam room, don't focus on what everyone else is doing. Focus on what you are doing. You're in there, you're in the zone. It's game time, it's go time. And you want to be focused and ready to take this exam. But if I hadn't said it, I'll go over again. Practice, practice, practice. That's what I want you to do. And then when it's over, let it go. Let it go. Kind of like a bad romance. Like, ooh, I don't want to think about that again. Let it go. There's nothing you can do about it. Don't try to second guess your correct answers or think about it all night. Don't try to compare your answers with someone else. Just let it go. Make sure you are taking the break that you need to between exams. The initial exam can be it can be very stressful, and that afterwards you just all these nerves and boom, you've done it. Yay, I'm done. But you're going to want to take some rest and then regroup to prepare for the next exam. So the message I want to leave with you is keep calm and ace your final exams. Keep calm and ace your final exams. So wishing you all good luck. And with that, I will turn it back over to Tracy.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a lot of great information and tips for those that are going to be experiencing their first law school exam. We do have one question that came in regarding the exam rules. Will we expect to receive the exam rules prior to the exam day, or will we receive them on site?
That's a really good question. I think it depends upon your law school, but what it wouldn't hurt to do is to ask that very question. You can ask that question of your registrar's office, or you can ask that question of your professor. More than likely, the professor turns in the exam rules to the registrar's office, so they may or may not give you access to that beforehand. So my suggestion is maybe getting from the professor what types of rules. In other words, all the things, the specifics that I just went over, kind of procure that from your professor beforehand so that you have a good idea of what the rules could potentially say.
Great. Well, thank you. There were a few questions
Sure.
about time allocation, but you covered them in your presentation because it was so concise and had so much great information. So with that said, we're going to thank everyone for joining us, and we're wishing you much success on your exams. Take care.
Absolutely.